Hello and welcome to With Winning in Mind. I'm your host, Troy Bassham, along with Lanny Bassham, the founder and living legend of Mental Management Systems. And today we're going to break down just how the top athletes communicate with each other compared to how everyone else who competes communicates. And it's quite different. And you have an interesting story on how you discovered that, it's not just how they think. The top athletes obviously think differently than everyone else when they're competing, but you and I were talking, and you were saying early when you got to the Army Marksmanship Unit that you were invited to a lunch with some of the top shooters at that time. These are world champions, Olympians, national record holders, and y'all were having a discussion, and you realized after that event with those individuals that they don't communicate like you thought they did, and you had a valuable lesson that kind of led you in a path of changing how you talk to other individuals. And even to this day, I think a lot of people don't realize that the elite level competitors talk differently to each other than all the other competitors. So dive into that. Share the story you were sharing with me.
Okay, so let's set the scene here. I'd been at the Army Marksmanship Unit. I'd passed my tryout stage, so I was going to stay there, and I'd worked up to where this was the first tournament that I was going to compete with the Army Blue Team, which was the top four. We had four-person teams back then, and the top four. It's my first tournament as a member of this team. So we shoot in the morning. I can't remember what kind of tournament it was, but we shoot in the morning, and then we have lunch together. So I get to eat lunch with the gun gods, and so I'm there, and I don't remember exactly the makeup of the people. I'm pretty sure that I can remember two of them. I can't recall who the fourth one was, but sitting next to me was John Foster, who was a two-time world champion. Major Foster was a major at that time. Was the only person that I knew or that anybody else knew that was a world champion in both a moving target event and a still target event. In other words, he'd been a world champion in still where targets are still, and also had been a world moving target champion.
So two completely different types of shooting events.
Two completely different types of shooting, and he was world champion in both of them. Kind of a famous guy. And he and Wigger, Colonel Wigger or Major Wigger at that time, was kind of buddies, and they'd been at the Marksmanship Unit and all that.
And a lot of years. Lonas Wiggers, who you refer to as the most winningest athlete you've ever known in your life.
I mean, to put Wigger in perspective. I'm third all-time medal count, as far as I know. If somebody needs to tell me if I've been demoted,
but you're now fourth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was.
But at that time, when you left, you were third.
I was third
international medal count.
Third all-time medal count of international medals, and with 35 medals. The guy that was in the second place had 36. Wigger had 112. When he died, and so that kind of puts him in a league that's
he's double you and Anderson put together.
Oh well, you just kind of almost triple what we each one of us had. So he was kind of the greatest guy, winningest shooter, and so anyway, I'm eating lunch with these guys, and they're talking about the competition that they had that morning, and I was talking about my experience, and I happened to talk about a problem that I had with one shot, and it was a bad shot, and I was talking about a bad shot, and I noticed that they kind of hushed when I started talking about it, and I was quite descriptive about how bad it was and why I did it and all that stuff. And finally, I stopped, and and Major Foster, I'm a lieutenant. And those of you in the military know that I'm barely an officer, and he's a major, field grade officer. And he reaches over and grabs my collar and tilts my head over so that he can whisper in my ear loud enough for me to hear it, maybe not loud enough for everybody else to hear it. And he says to me, he says, "We don't talk like that at this level." And I thought, I was offended. I thought, oh gosh, what you were talking about your shooting? I was talking about my. I can't talk about my shooting. What's going on, Mayor? Am I being hazed by these guys? Intimidated by them? Are they trying to, you know? And I was just, so I shut up and I started listening. And after a while, I realized that I was talking about the problem. They were talking about what they were doing about it. They were talking about the solution of the problem. I mean, now that I'm older and I've learned about mental management and things like that, I recognize now what was really going on. Although we never talked about this, we never had classes on it or anything like that, but they were happy to talk to each other about the solutions that they discovered, about their successes and what they were doing right. They just were not going to tolerate somebody that was whining about a problem. And so, later we would find out through mental management and all that, what we teach today is that every time that you think about, talk about, or write about a problem, self-image shrinks. Every time you talk about the solution to the problem, self-image grows. Well, they were happy to have a conversation about something that would cause self-image to grow, but they weren't going to tolerate me talking about the problem. And I noticed that when you start talking about the problem to Colonel Wigger or Major Foster or anybody else, he later on became Colonel, They don't talk to you very long. I mean, they are not going to sit around and tolerate someone talking about a problem instead of a solution. So that's one way that top performers tend to communicate with other people, is they tend to not tolerate people that are talking about a problem or complaining about a problem or
they see a difference.
They see a difference
between problem and solution.
Yeah, and that's the first time that I ever thought about that. I came away, and after a while, I started watching how Wigger talked, and Lonis Wigger was an extremely confident guy, and I never ever heard him apologize for anything he did. I mean, he made mistakes, but he didn't talk about them. He was almost like, when he made a mistake, he learned from it and moved on. That was his one of his strengths, is that he didn't talk about his bad shots ever, and that later on I would understand that that's kind of a principle, that you need to focus on what you did right, reinforce what you did right, because whatever you think about, talk about, write about, you tend to become it. And so when you complain, you have a problem. Well, he never complained. He always was extremely optimistic. And I think about all of the people that I respected the most, people like David Kimes, David Ross, Jack Foster, Lonis Wigger, all of these guys are world champions or Olympic medalists or people that had achieved something. When I look back, when I think about all these the communications that I had with them, and we're watching them communicate with each other, they were always talking about what they wanted to do or what they needed to do, and not the problem.
And most of us focus on what we did or what just happened and what was wrong about it, rather than facing what is the solution. Like, I know this happened. Like, you know what you're faced with. You just did it. So you know if you weren't successful, this is why. And we tend to know, well, if I can identify the problem, I can find a solution. Where they're looking at said, no, I already know what the problem is. Why think about it more? I need to jump into the solution from that. But the second thing that they do is not only do they handle how they think about it, but Jack didn't allow you to change. I mean, they're very protective of how people around them communicate, which is what I found most interesting is, we don't talk like this at this level. He was making a point that if you want to be in this group, you have to assimilate to the way we communicate. We're not going to bend over to the way you communicate.
That's right.
That's a big learning moment, but you didn't realize that until a little bit later, though.
Well, I didn't realize it because he didn't explain himself. He didn't tell me why that was wrong. I'm not sure he really understood why it was wrong, but we can explain it now because we now have we now teach about imprinting, that every time you think about, talk about, write about something, it creates an imprint in your self-image, and your self-image grows or shrinks in the direction of the imprinting. Well, I wish we'd have had that conversation, where he could have explained, oh, by the way, Lieutenant Bassham, this is the reason why you can't say that, We never had that conversation. And it would be years later when I learned, tried to figure this out, to know why this was not true. But they figured it out some way, and we back in those days, we didn't think that the mental game was something you could learn. We thought it was something you had. Like everybody, you're either mentally tough or you're not, and it wasn't something you could learn. So we weren't trying to learn it, and that was it took me a long time before I figured out. Oh, mental game is definitely something you can learn.
Yeah, because in your era, it was the self-image and confidence was basically you either had the self-image, I'm good, or you don't. It's not something that you can be taught to build or create. It was just, well, he's either that good or not. And what you find out is these people are creating that self-image because they're communicating with each other in a way that won't let them down. There's a way that they protected themselves. They protected their ego by focusing and talking in this manner. As wherever you watch most television, what do? We see a lot of people complaining about things and talking about things that are not helpful, but it's entertaining. And for the spectator, that's fine, but for the athlete, that's probably not.
Well, what most people hear, I ask this question to a lot of people. When you go to a tournament in your sport, whatever activity you're doing, and people come off the field after having competed, let's say they're golfers and they come off the golf course, and at your club, if somebody were to say, how did you do, what do they talk about first? What they did right or what they did wrong? And almost everybody says that in my sport, they talk about what went wrong first. Well, that becomes a habit, and people do that. And that's one of the things that's different between the people in the middle of the leaderboard and the top performers. The top performers tend not to do that. They tend to talk about what they did right, or they don't talk about it at all. And but they're not going to reinforce their problems, and sometimes it's fun to watch when you ask someone. Like I use an example in one of my books about I was being interviewed in Japan after the World Championships, and one of the World Championships, and I won a medal in a tournament. I shot a 598 out of 600 probably in the prone event, and won a medal. And some journalist asked me what happened on those two nines, and I told him, I said, do you really want to know? Do you really want to know how I get nines? I don't remember what happened on those two nines. I can tell you about the last 10 I shot. In other words, I'm not going to talk about the problem. And I think now that was after mental management and things like that. But I think that somehow, even in my day, when that first trip, that the champions of the day, they were the top shooters in the world. Wigger was definitely the top at his peak, and they knew. Maybe we weren't taught it, but they still knew, and there are people today that have had no mental training at all that kind of have figured it out, and somehow or another they found out that, hey, if it works, I'm going to do that again. If it doesn't work, I'm not going to do that again. A good idea.
Yeah, it's not just talking about, they think about the solution, they talk about the solution, they don't allow other people around them to talk about problems, to taint how they think about themselves. And if you want to be in the top 5%, you want to be involved in their communication, it's probably a good thing to realize that I need to start talking about what I did well. And if I want their advice on something, say, hey, I'm looking for a solution to something. What's your opinion on this? Or what would you suggest would be advantageous, as opposed to, hey, I got this problem and I'm doing this and nothing's working. What do you think they're going to say? They're probably going to say, look, you got your own deal. I'm going. But if you sit there and said, look, I've got a solution. I'm looking for a solution to this. What do you think I should do about it? What's your opinion? They're probably going to give you a really good piece of advice, because they've probably been through it already. They probably know at least where to send you in the right direction, but it's going to be short and sweet, because the elite athletes like to hang around other elite athletes. They don't really like to hang out with all the other athletes. So you used to have a phrase years ago, you used to say a lot, that it's lonely at the top. And well, that's because there's only 5% of the people to hang out with, where you got 95% of the other guys are hanging out. But if you really want to be the best you can be, you need to start thinking about the solution. You want to talk about what you did well first. So let's end on this. Let's conclude by how we work with our clients on making sure they're working to communicate like a top 5%er. And I'll start it with the easy one first, and I'll let you take the second thing we recommend. Right. The first thing we recommend, anytime you're competing, when you're done, the first thing you want to do, because most people are communicating with a parent, a coach, a teammate, or someone, they're communicating with someone on their support group, exactly, breaking down kind of what happened. So the game's over, we're breaking it down. The first thing you want to do is you want to talk about what I did well. Hey, coach, this is what I did really well today. And the coach is going to acknowledge that. Say, oh, yeah. And he might even say, hey, like on this play that you executed, it was perfect. Even this play was good. And you're starting to focus on what you want to have happen on more of a consistent basis. And that's the first thing you always recommend, is focus on what was good, no matter how the performance was. It could have been a great performance that you won the game, or it could be one where you didn't win the game, but there's something good that happened. Always focus on what you did well. That's number one. What's the second thing you recommend people to do?
You kind of have three questions that I ask my people after tournaments. And that's the first one, is making sure you talk about what went right. The second one is, what did you learn? Making a mistake is not a mental error. Making a mistake and learning from it is a requirement to get better. And that's an important step, is that, okay, if you had some issues, what did that teach you? You know, you don't look at a problem as being a failure or a loss or a lost. It's more of a I win and I learn. You know, I'm learning. Well, what did you learn? What did you learn from the shots that didn't go well? What did you learn? And the third question is, what are you going to do about it? You know, I'll tell you what the champions do. The champions learn from their mistakes and they do something about it. But they don't complain about it. They don't bitch about it. They don't beat themselves up about it.
They don't blame others either.
No.
They take ownership of it. And the way you phrase that last question is, what are you going to do about it? You're the athlete. You're the individual that has to go back and compete again. What are you going to do about it? If you're waiting for other people to solve your issue, you're probably not going to be very successful.
Yeah.
You know, at least not when you get to the top level of being an athlete. If this is important to you and you like this information, please give us a thumbs up if you like this video. Please subscribe if you haven't, and share this with somebody else that you care about succeeding in their life and in their sport. And until next time, we'll see you then.